Hello, everyone. This is Noah and John, and we are from UrbanDigs. We are talking Manhattan. Johnny, we got Jared Antin, Director of Sales from Elegran here today, and we're going to have a really comprehensive, analytical. This guy's smart. So
Very smart. One of the things that I like about Jared is he's constantly, bouncing ideas off of us, and he's got a really good head on his shoulders about what's happening out on the streets, and he puts data together in an interesting way to really draw some great conclusions. So, without further ado, I think we should turn it over to Jared.
Yeah, we're gonna get to Jared. I mean, look, this is gonna be it's good we're recording it because we're gonna have to listen to this a few times. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, wait a second. Are we recording?
I don't know.
No, I'm just kidding. Of course we are. Of course we are. That's what we do.
But anyway, what I'm saying is that if you're listening to this and something gets a little bit over your head or you have to listen to it twice, that is okay. That's why we're doing this. So Jared, thank you for being here. Great to have you. And what is going on in New York City real estate?
Hey, Noah. Hey, John. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here, sharing some insights. So a lot is going on. That's a short answer. We can dig into a bit of a longer answer. But it's definitely a tale of multiple markets based upon neighborhood and price point. So if you're looking at, the under $1 million segment, and even in the, $1 to $2 million segment, it's almost like it was last year, like COVID never happened in terms of, there being strong buyer demand. We have a fair amount of inventory that's come onto the market. And the buyers generally in those segments have a need or a want to be here, and they're trying to trade up from their rental apartment or want to just secure a new place and take advantage of a little bit of a softness in the market there that gives them a little bit of a better avenue to purchase an apartment. When you get above 3 million, it's drastically different though. Many of those above $3 million buyers have the means to have multiple residences, and they're focused on their home in the Hamptons or somewhere other than in the city right now, and they're largely absent from the market. We're seeing very little transactions happening above 4 million. I know you follow the Ocean report and things like that. There's not a lot that's happening there. And the deals that are largely spurred because there's a real, great deal, right? They're buying it because there's a good deal. Whereas if you're looking at what's happening in the lower price points, there's a need, and they're buying for need-based, not want-based.
Very, very interesting. And you know what? We were talking about luxury for a second. I wonder where that luxury threshold is now. I mean, it's top 10%, right, John? Is technically how we're defining luxury?
That's usually how we define it, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's not something we really follow. I mean, 4 million is definitely a great level to do it at. But I'm just curious naturally. I mean, I wonder if it's like 3.2 million or something now, or something underneath because of the nature of this crisis. Jared, you had some interesting things you were talking about before we started this podcast. You were talking about absorption rates. And for those of you that don't understand what absorption rates are, basically as that absorption rate number goes higher, the market is weaker. And as that absorption rate goes lower, the market is stronger. And it's reflective in months of inventory based on demand. So tell us what you compiled with absorption rate and what the conclusions are.
Absolutely. So in keeping with some of my prior comments, not surprisingly, the sub $1 million market is pretty competitive. There's about 12 months of inventory there from an absorption rate perspective. But you compare that with, 5 million plus, and there's almost 40 months of inventory. That's a huge difference. For context, the absorption rates have basically doubled in the last 6 months, and the absorption rates have basically tripled from where they were in 2014, which were the boom years of Manhattan. So there's a lot of inventory and a slowdown in terms of the amount of contracts, but it's incredibly notable on the luxury side of the market.
So what about location? Could you give me anything by neighborhood? Anything that's experiencing what's hot and what's not, for example?
Yeah, so there's a couple key neighborhoods where there's a lot of demand, and it's important to note, who's buying today. So we're seeing a lot of locals, right? People that, have lived here for a while, want to make New York their home for a long period of time. There's fewer pied-à-terre buyers, fewer investors, fewer international buyers. So keeping that in mind, you look at which neighborhoods are incredibly hot right now, and they're focused on the ones that are more neighborhoody, in demand long time by the local buyers. So we have Chelsea, Gramercy, Murray Hill, and the Upper West Side. These are seeing strong increases in buyer activity over the last 2 months. Brooklyn has been incredibly hot, and Brooklyn has been incredibly in demand by locals for the last 3.5 years. And this trend is even more magnified today when you don't have all those other buyer types I just mentioned in the market. So Williamsburg, Greenpoint, Park Slope, Brooklyn Heights, Red Hook, these are neighborhoods that are seeing a lot of demand because Manhattanites can come and buy in Brooklyn, get a little bit more space, light, air for the money. And those things are all very much in demand right now.
So let me ask you this, Jared, because I think you make a very interesting point here. When we talk about, Brooklyn seems very hot right now. And what you're simply saying is there's always been a demand for Brooklyn. It's just been obscured by some of the higher end sales. And as we strip those away, we sort of look at sort of the under 2 million sales, the under 1 million sales specifically. There's just been this sort of native demand for Brooklyn that's just constantly been bubbling at the surface, whereas that same demand in Manhattan is a little bit less. Is that sort of an accurate summation?
Yes, said it perfectly.
Okay, great.
Jared, just to get it clear, sorry, John, it's not like Brooklyn's on fire. We're talking relative to Manhattan, right? So Brooklyn has had some impact, or what are you telling me here?
So Brooklyn has had impact. I mean, if you read the headlines, the news articles are painting Brooklyn in the same ways they're painting, Westchester, Connecticut, and the Hamptons, that it's on fire. And it is to some extent. And when you look at the bid-ask spreads in terms of the discounts, Brooklyn is hovering right at about a 1% discount off ask compared to Manhattan that's, closer to, 5%. So from that perspective, there is much, it's a much tighter market.
Interesting. And a lot of this really sort of applies to the buy side because you're sort of looking at, what's out there and, kind of gauging the competition amongst your fellow buyers to sort of get a sense for how the market is. But if we could shift to the sell side for a second, one of the things you mentioned is sellers are facing a dilemma today. I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit on that for us.
Yeah, so there's the seller's dilemma, or the catch-22 as I'm calling it. And a seller really has a choice. They have a choice between, do they want to price on the higher side and with the understanding that buyer's going to come in and negotiate. So if they price higher, they think, hey, a buyer's going to come in and lowball, let me at least leave a little bit of cushion to negotiate. Or the flip side is, do you price aggressively, where the market is, or in some cases right below, to just get that buyer demand. And this is a constant struggle of sellers today. And I spend a lot of time, advising sellers, advising my agents who are dealing with listings about what to do. And I honestly believe that, a seller needs to come and price aggressively today, right? We can do a lot of marketing and we're doing it, but if they're not priced properly, nothing else really matters. Unless you have a really neat trophy apartment that's one of a kind. But your run-of-the-mill average apartment needs to be priced right. Because if you're priced too high, you're just not going to get any interest. And if you're priced on the lower side, you may still get lowball bids. But if you do your job right and you get enough demand, those bids will bid themselves up and you can recreate artificial demand. And I actually have a perfect A/B test to this. We had put on 2 very, very similar listings in terms of conditions, building, things like that. And one we priced on the money and one we priced a little bit high. And the on the money, I got, multiple showings and multiple bids and ultimately got it to a very, very good price within 3 days. And the one that was priced a little bit high, I've had only 2 showings and no bids. So it's a perfect A/B test to prove that hypothesis, that if a seller is really serious to sell, come priced well. You don't have to accept a lower offer than you want, but if you're not comfortable accepting, where you're priced at, it may not be the right time for you to sell.
That's really interesting, Jared. That A/B test right there, and the one that was priced high. Number one, it's really interesting that you could see right off the bat. All right, this one is priced high, and this one is priced right. The one that's priced high, is that the seller's call? Just he has the luxury of time, or he's just he wants to see for himself that he can't get his number, or
Yeah, some sellers are more motivated to let something go than others. So it's really trying to manage those expectations and understand what their time frame is. A seller that wants to sell today, the window of opportunity is here, I believe. So if someone wants to get out of their property within the next 6 to 12 months, now's the time. Some are testing the market and a little bit more patient. And, they wanted to use the August time period until we got to Labor Day to see.
Right. Would you think that most of the sellers that are out there are in the category of I need to move property, or in the category of you know what, let me see what I can get here. I'll go down, but I'm not going down 20%.
It's a mix, and you don't necessarily know if you're representing a buyer until you put in that bid. You know, there's definitely some people that just want to liquidate it. I would say there's a fair amount of people that want to have the option of liquidating. So they want to be on the market to see if they get something within reason. And if they do, they'll liquidate it. This is especially true with people that own pied-à-terres, you know, that may think that they can't use it for a little while because they can sell now. You take the maintenance that they're paying every month, you can spend a month in the nicest hotel in Manhattan for the money they're going to save for the next 12 to 18 months.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about here and there on some of our reports is that, you know, we usually define the market in terms of buyers and where the buyers' bids are. And while that's always true, I think today's market's much more determined by the sellers and which sellers are determined to sell and which sellers are reluctant to sell. And one of the things that we've been noticing since the market has reopened, you know, as we got into sort of July, end of July, mid-August now, the number of units that sellers are taking off the market has slowly and steadily increased, as it does in a typical active market. Like once several weeks have passed and the sellers haven't gotten the bids they want, they're pulling their listings off the market, which sort of tells us that these are not panic sellers. They're not trying to go anywhere fast. They put it on, they didn't get their numbers, they're going to take it off. They might try again. We usually see a nice bump in terms of active inventory after Labor Day, but it also tells us that it seems like this exodus that everyone's talking about from Manhattan is yet to be decided. And I think that's fair to say. I don't know if Noah would agree to that, but you know, it seems like this market's all about the sellers these days.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, I mean, look, we're also in it. We're in it. I mean, and where are we going to be every year from now? You got to look a year out. You got to look 2 years out. You know, you can't analyze it when you're inside of it. Sometimes you can't see well. So
yeah,
let's at least clear the clouds a little bit.
You know, and I think one of the things that people always forget, and I think Jared, you touched on this, is that when people talk about Manhattan real estate, Brooklyn real estate in general, it's a very illiquid thing. And we talk about sort of the conditions of the market and the marketing we're putting into this, because these things tend to sit on the market for weeks, months, sometimes years in many cases. But the fact remains that Manhattan is by far the most liquid of all these illiquid markets. And like every market, it's really a function of price. And the market at the right price is very, very liquid. It's very, very transactional. So as you're saying with your A/B test, if you price it right, the buyers are there. And that's sort of a long-winded introduction to my questions, is if you could sort of walk us through your price calculation for a seller, how you're doing it these days, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so I'm giving increasing weight right now on what else is on the market. You know, in the past, we focused so much on closed sales and a little bit on what was on the market, but closed sales are so irrelevant right now, as we've been talking, and you guys have been talking about the price discovery. So it's really about the consumer choice, because buying right now is a principle of substitution. I could buy this or I could buy that. So if you're not even fitting into the realm as a seller of what other options are on the market, you're just out of contention. And as you've been tracking, I mean, we're thankful that supply is leveling off right now, because consumers are starting to just get awash in inventory, right? And there's so much choice, and that's, as more supply comes on, it weakens a seller's ability to command a certain price. So what I'm focusing on right now is really looking at, you know, what is on the market right now, where is the price, how long has it been there, have they had a series of price drops, reaching out to those brokers, understanding, have they had offers? If so, you know, are they going to share? Can you give me any insight of where they were? Looking at what recently went into contract, and you know, the further out that you do these analysis, is there's more that's going into contract now. So that becomes a little bit more clear, where were they priced? And that helps give you a clear analysis. And the tough part is when you have these conversations over a matter of weeks, you know, the advice can change very, very quickly as new inventory comes on. And especially this is true in the large buildings. I mean, one of our agents has, you know, several listings in a big building in Midtown West, and you know, she's getting one listing on, then another seller in the building calls her up and says, hey, I want to put a comparable listing on and I want to undercut that guy. And now that creates another little thing that the agent has to manage about, okay, I have one seller that wants a price here because they're really motivated to get it out. And I have another seller that isn't as motivated and wants to put on a little bit higher. And even if there's multiple agents involved, you're seeing the same things, because now sellers within the buildings, especially, these buildings that were built in the mid 2000s that are fairly cookie cutter, apartment A is very, very similar to apartment B there.
That's a really interesting point. The sell side competition, the degree of sell side competition in times like this, when illiquidity goes down, and you have some sellers that have a time you need to sell, and other sellers and most sellers that don't, and now you're in the same building or you're right nearby in the best comp, and they just keep underpinning you. What do you do? These are things that as an agent you have to explain to the seller up front. That is part of the times. That I bet you most agents don't even discuss that dynamic, and they'll just wait for it to happen and then deal with it on the fly in real time as it happens. You go, yeah, well, what are we going to do? You got to lower their price. They got to lower the price. I guess he needs to sell.
Right.
It should be discussed ahead of time.
And managing those expectations. I mean, when I give an analysis right now to a prospective seller, I'm educating an agent on what to do. I have a whole preamble of basically, hey, these are my conditions or my disclosures, right? This is subject to change. We need to be on top of this. And, I can call you up tomorrow and say, hey, apartment upstairs or downstairs came on and they're 150,000 below what I told you, and everything changes. And then if you introduce this into a co-op standpoint, then you have a whole other question of what's the board even going to accept. And I've been exposed to a number of deals where the board rejects it because they think it's quote unquote too low, without real understanding that doesn't mean that the next buyer is going to come on at more. It means the next buyer is most likely going to come on at next or at lower, and it creates a downward spiral there. So, in a condo, it's one thing. In a co-op, it's a whole other beast.
Right. Of course. And I imagine it's one conversation in Manhattan. It's quite another conversation in Brooklyn.
Right.
And that's sort of kind of, we're starting to wrap things up here. And I'm just curious, Jared, for the agents out there that are on the sell side right now, what's the one piece of advice you would give them?
Over communicate. You don't get fired by over communicating. So, I the way I do business is transparency, disclosure, consistency, and the no update, right? I want to get a no update, right? When people don't communicate, people get concerned about what's happening behind the scenes and they invent their own narrative. So the one advice I have is over communicate to the sellers, keep them up to speed on what's happening, and give them metrics about what's going on. How many people inquired, how many people viewed it, what the feedback is, and just be incredibly honest and transparent with them.
What about the buyers?
So on the buy side, it's the same thing. Explain what's going to happen. You need to have that buyer broker consultation up front. You need to sit down, walk them through the whole process, explain to them how this is going to go, explain to them why they need to get pre-approved up front, go over the revenue form, explain your role in the transaction, introduce the attorney. All of that needs to happen right up front. And you need to understand, what is their time frame? What is their motivation to buy? And what's happening is, what we saw in July, right after this unlocked, was a shortening sales cycle, right? Like pre-COVID, we were seeing, the average inquiry to offer could be 3 months, 4 months. It took a lot of, follow up, and then what happened after the shutdown, when it reopened, there was a lot of people that, just wanted to buy. They were so sick of their apartment, they needed something new. And we saw a very, very quick, inquiry to offer, like 30, 45 days. But that has started to change now. As there's been more inventory, buyers have been awash in inventory, and there's choice paralysis right now. So more people are shopping. They're waiting to see what's going to come on next week and maybe priced lower than what's on this week. So for an agent's perspective, to work with buyers today, it's all about staying in front of them, following up, following back, being consistent. And again, no update. Hey, nothing new came on. Or, hey, you were interested in this apartment, it ended up going into contract. Your lowball bid, was way off the mark, and here's why. And sometimes buyers need to lose an apartment or two to get a sense of where they are. And again, it depends on what price point we're in, sub million, sub 3 million, or 5 million plus. There's a drastic difference in terms of the amount of negotiating power that a buyer may have.
Right. Yeah, and lastly, for agents trying to build up business in this market, what do you suggest?
So a lot of clients right now that we're seeing are former renters. There are people that were renting a 1-bedroom or a junior 4, and now they want to buy a 2-bedroom. So look introspectively, look at people, in your network, look at people that you may have helped find a rental apartment years ago, And what I've seen is we've been getting a lot of business by just being a voice of reason, right, in the marketplace, of just someone who's calling it like it is and educating consumers about what's actually going on. You know, what you see all the stats in the media, they're very rearview mirror and distorted, right? They don't really tell the reality. Sales aren't really down as much as they're saying when you look at the hyper local market. So it's important to educate consumers about what's really happening.
Right. So in other words, shouting New York is dead is not going to get you any new consumers.
Right. Every broker actually has a new best friend in Jerry Seinfeld for his New York Times op-ed yesterday. I saw that blasted everywhere, all over social media. So,
right.
Thank you, Jerry.
And I saw some consistencies there. You said transparency is one thing. And listen, I agree. This is a great period to go cement your role as credible, transparent advisor right now. I mean, tell it like it is. And your client will look to you.
And what we're seeing, I mean, at Elegran, we have, 85 agents, and we have a number of people that are crushing it right now. Elegran's doing about 4% of the market share right now in New York, meaning we've been involved in about 4% of the transactions each of these last 3 weeks, which is incredible considering we have like less than 0.5% of the agent count. And what we're seeing our agents doing is that are succeeding is they're consistent. So they're pounding the pavement every day. They're not here for 2 days and then gone for 2. They're pounding the pavement every day. They're following up with clients, both those that are active today and those that were active 6 months ago. They know the market, they know the stats, they know how to talk to it. So it's consistency, it's education, and it's being quick on the follow back and response rate.
Awesome stuff. I love it. And on that note, we are going to end. We are out of time. Jared Antin from Elegran, thank you so much for joining this call. This is Noah and John. We are from UrbanDigs. We're talking Manhattan, and we'll catch you next time.